Michael Jackson's name has resurfaced in newly released Jeffrey Epstein documents, and within seconds of that revelation, the digital world erupted. The reaction was immediate, intense, and emotionally charged, as if the conclusion had already been drafted long before anyone paused to examine the details. Screenshots spread faster than context. Headlines traveled faster than facts. Social media platforms filled with commentary, accusations, and certainty delivered in capital letters. But before assumptions solidify into belief, there is something essential that must be understood. Large portions of these documents remain heavily redacted. Entire sections are blacked out. Names, dates, and contextual information are withheld, in part because at least one alleged victim referenced in the broader investigation may have been extremely young at the time of the reported crimes. That fact alone demands caution. The release of documents does not equal the release of complete truth. A name appearing in investigative records does not automatically equate to criminal behavior. It does not confirm guilt, nor does it replace due process. Yet in the era of viral outrage, where information is consumed in fragments and conclusions are drawn in seconds, nuance often disappears before it has a chance to breathe. The documents include multiple high-profile figures: former presidents Donald Trump and Bill Clinton, magician David Copperfield, Prince Andrew, and Michael Jackson. Some of these individuals were photographed in social settings with Epstein years before his crimes became widely known. Others were reportedly mentioned in address books or travel logs. These associations, while undeniably newsworthy, exist within a broader social context. Epstein, before his arrest and public disgrace, moved within elite circles. He attended high-profile events. He cultivated relationships with politicians, entertainers, academics, and financiers. Photographs and connections from that era, taken in isolation, do not automatically establish criminal complicity. However, when Michael Jackson's name appeared, the reaction was distinctly different. It did not feel like neutral curiosity. It felt like ignition. Headlines multiplied. Comment sections exploded. Old narratives resurfaced with renewed force. The response seemed almost reflexive, as though history had already determined how this detail would be interpreted. For some observers, the mere appearance of his name validated long-standing suspicions. For others, it reopened unresolved debates that have lingered for decades. Yet beneath the noise, beneath the hashtags and viral clips, lies a more complex and uncomfortable question. Why does one name repeatedly become the cultural lightning rod, while others recede into the background? Why does outrage appear to attach itself so permanently to certain figures, while others receive comparatively measured attention? Is it because of the scale of fame, the polarizing legacy, the unresolved emotions that still surround his life and death? Or is it because some narratives are easier to sustain than others? This is where the conversation inevitably shifts toward Corey Feldman. Feldman, one of the most recognizable child actors of the 1980s, has spent years speaking publicly about what he describes as systemic abuse within Hollywood. His claims are not vague. He has alleged that powerful individuals exploited children within the entertainment industry, and that some of those individuals continue to operate under layers of protection. According to Feldman, this was not a series of isolated incidents. It was a pattern embedded in the structure of the business. When asked whether he reported these allegations to authorities, Feldman has consistently maintained that he did. He has stated that he provided names. He has insisted that the information is on record. He has described cooperating with law enforcement and attempting to push the conversation toward what he believed were real perpetrators. Yet he has also expressed frustration, deep, visible frustration, that, in his telling, the investigative focus repeatedly circled back to Michael Jackson. Feldman's claim is not merely that he was questioned about Jackson. It is that broader allegations, names he believed deserved scrutiny, did not receive the same sustained attention. In his view, the spotlight narrowed instead of widened. Whether one agrees with Feldman's interpretation or not, the pattern he describes introduces a troubling dynamic. When a single, globally recognizable figure becomes the center of gravity, does the system risk overlooking the possibility of something larger? The tension here is not simply about one celebrity. It is about focus. It is about how public and institutional attention can condense around a familiar headline while potentially sidelining more complex, less marketable truths. Feldman's narrative suggests that the story he wanted to tell was never meant to revolve around one person. It was meant to expose what he believes was an ecosystem. Yet, as he recounts it, the ecosystem faded from view, and the conversation narrowed again to the name that already carried enormous cultural weight. Whether that narrowing was intentional, accidental, or simply a byproduct of media dynamics is a matter of interpretation. But the pattern itself, attention gravitating toward one lightning rod, raises questions that are difficult to ignore. In high-profile scandals, especially those involving power and influence, the public often seeks a single face to attach to outrage. It simplifies a complicated story. It provides a target. It creates clarity where ambiguity is uncomfortable. And that is perhaps where the real tension in this moment lies, not in the mere presence of a name within documents, but in the broader pattern of how certain names become permanent symbols, while the larger landscape remains only partially illuminated. Feldman has described feeling deeply isolated, as though the weight of exposing an entire system rested on his shoulders alone. In his telling, the responsibility to speak out about something he believes was widespread and entrenched became his burden to carry publicly, while countless others who allegedly possessed similar knowledge remained silent. He has questioned why he was expected to deliver names, evidence, and timelines on demand, while thousands of others who moved through the same environment were never held to the same standard of accountability. The frustration in his voice during interviews is unmistakable. He does not describe himself as a hero. He describes himself as someone who survived, and then found himself pressured to become the sole whistleblower for an industry far larger than one person. In multiple interviews, Feldman has warned parents to approach the entertainment industry with caution. He has emphasized that behind the polished red carpets, flashing cameras, and curated public images lies a far more complex ecosystem, one where power imbalances can be profound and vulnerability can be exploited. His message is not theatrical. It is delivered with the tone of someone who believes he has witnessed something darker than the public understands. At the same time, however, he has consistently drawn a clear distinction when it comes to Michael Jackson. According to Feldman, there was one major figure in Hollywood who did not harm him. One figure, he says, was not part of what he describes as systemic abuse: Michael Jackson. In Feldman's public statements, being around Michael felt safe. He has described Jackson's environment as structured and controlled, particularly strict about drugs and alcohol, elements that Feldman says were pervasive elsewhere in the industry. He has spoken about feeling, for brief moments, like a child again, free from the pressures and manipulations he associates with other experiences in Hollywood. Whether one accepts Feldman's broader allegations about systemic abuse or remains skeptical, one element of his narrative has remained consistent for decades. He does not place Michael Jackson among the individuals who harmed him. When allegations against Jackson first became public in 1993, Feldman reportedly spoke with law enforcement. He has stated that during those conversations, he repeatedly denied any inappropriate behavior involving Jackson. According to his account, investigators appeared focused on building a case around Michael rather than pursuing the other names he claims to have provided. If his version of events is accurate, it introduces difficult questions about investigative priorities. Why would attention narrow to one individual when broader allegations were being offered? Was that focus driven by evidence, public pressure, media momentum, or something else entirely? Those questions remain part of the larger debate. Other former child stars have also publicly stated they did not experience abuse at Jackson's hands. Macaulay Culkin has consistently said that nothing inappropriate occurred during the time he spent at Neverland Ranch. Wade Robson testified under oath in 2005 that nothing had happened to him. While these statements do not conclusively resolve broader public disputes, they complicate the simplified narrative that often dominates headlines. They introduce testimony that does not align neatly with popular assumptions, forcing observers to grapple with a more layered and contradictory picture. The first major case against Jackson in 1993 involved allegations from Jordan Chandler, and it quickly escalated into a global media spectacle. The story dominated news cycles, reshaped public perception, and attached itself permanently to Jackson's legacy. Reports have long circulated that, prior to criminal proceedings, financial demands were made. Jackson ultimately settled a civil lawsuit for a substantial sum. Some have interpreted that decision as a strategic effort to avoid a prolonged and career-damaging legal TTLE rather than as an admission of guilt. The criminal investigation that followed did not lead to a conviction. Authorities conducted extensive searches of Neverland Ranch and interviewed numerous individuals connected to Jackson, yet criminal charges were not secured at that time. For many observers, these outcomes remain points of contention. To supporters, they reinforce the absence of legal proof. To critics, they raise additional suspicions. What cannot be disputed is that the 1993 case marked a turning point. It altered the trajectory of Jackson's public image permanently, embedding doubt into the narrative of one of the most famous entertainers in history. From that moment forward, every subsequent headline would be filtered through the shadow cast during that year. And it is within that shadow that every new mention, every document release, every resurfaced connection continues to be interpreted, debated, and amplified. Years later, in 2003, another accusation surfaced, one that would culminate in one of the most closely watched celebrity trials in modern history. The allegations involved Gavin Arvizo, and the prosecution presented a narrative built around claims of manipulation, grooming, and misconduct. The courtroom became a battleground not only for legal arguments, but for public perception. Every development was dissected in real time by global media outlets. Commentators speculated nightly. Headlines shifted daily. The case was not unfolding quietly in a courtroom, it was unfolding on a world stage. The prosecution sought to establish a pattern, revisiting prior controversies and presenting witnesses who claimed to support their case. The defense, in turn, brought forward testimony intended to dismantle that pattern. Multiple individuals who had spent time around Jackson testified that they had not experienced inappropriate behavior. Among them were Macaulay Culkin and Wade Robson, who stated under oath that nothing improper had occurred during their interactions with him. The trial extended over months, with exhaustive cross-examinations, character assessments, and detailed scrutiny of timelines and credibility. When the case finally went to the jury, the weight of global attention did not accompany them into the deliberation room. There, it became a matter of evidence. After approximately 32 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict, not guilty on all 14 counts. Regardless of how public opinion may have evolved before or since, that verdict remains part of the official legal record. It represents the conclusion reached by 12 individuals tasked with weighing the evidence presented in court. Yet acquittal did not erase suspicion. In the court of public opinion, reputations rarely reset to zero. The cultural label attached to Jackson persisted long after the gavel fell. Media narratives, once formed, have a way of outliving the trials that challenge them. Once a public figure's identity becomes intertwined with controversy, disentangling fact from perception becomes nearly impossible. The courtroom may close a case, but headlines echo far longer. Decades later, when the Epstein documents began to surface, Jackson's name entered the discourse once again. Reports indicated that he may have visited Epstein's Palm Beach residence, reportedly in connection with financial matters during a turbulent period in his career. Additional reporting suggested that during at least one deposition connected to the Epstein investigation, a witness was directly asked whether she had any sexual contact or inappropriate interaction with Jackson. According to published accounts, she denied such contact. Those contextual details, when mentioned at all, were often overshadowed by the more provocative fact that his name appeared in the documents. And that is where the broader question emerges. The argument presented here is not that investigations should cease, nor that allegations should be dismissed without scrutiny. Accountability matters, due process matters, victims deserve to be heard, but it is equally valid to ask why certain names repeatedly dominate public outrage while others receive comparatively measured attention. When a deceased figure is continually placed at the center of controversy, does that focus unintentionally or intentionally divert attention from individuals who are still alive, still powerful, and still capable of influence? This is not a simple question, and it does not lend itself to easy answers, but it is one worth asking. Corey Feldman has spoken emotionally about the cost of silence and the long-term damage he believes abuse inflicted on many former child actors. He has described watching friends spiral into addiction, mental health struggles, and in some cases, early deaths. In his view, substance abuse among young performers was not merely reckless behavior. It was often intertwined with unresolved trauma. He has spoken of invisible wounds of an entire generation, on carrying scars that were never publicly acknowledged. Whether one agrees with every detail of Feldman's claims or approaches them with skepticism, the anguish in his voice when discussing those years is unmistakable. He speaks less like someone chasing headlines and more like someone still grappling with experiences that shaped, and perhaps fractured, his adolescence. And within that pain lies the central tension of this narrative, the difference between allegation and proof, between suspicion and verdict, between perception and documented outcome. The story continues to evolve, but the questions it raises remain as complex and as unresolved as ever. Michael Jackson died in 2009. He cannot step in front of a camera to clarify, defend, or confront renewed allegations. He cannot respond to headlines that resurface his name years after his passing. What remains instead are fragments of history, court records, sworn testimony, investigative files, archived interviews, media portrayals, and the collective memory of a public that has debated his legacy for decades. The story no longer belongs to the man himself. It belongs to how those pieces are interpreted, reshaped, and retold by each new generation encountering them for the first time. Jackson often spoke about visiting hospitals and orphanages without press announcements or camera crews. He claimed the media gravitated toward scandal and rarely highlighted quiet acts of charity. Supporters point to those visits, those private donations, and those interactions with sick or disadvantaged children as reflections of his character. Critics interpret those same actions through a different lens, questioning motive or context. In cases as polarizing as this, perception frequently overshadows documentation. Acts of kindness become contested. Silence becomes suspicious. Even gestures that once appeared simple are recast within larger narratives of doubt. This narrative does not ask viewers to suspend skepticism or abandon critical thinking. It asks for the opposite. It invites examination of primary sources, legal transcripts, jury verdicts, sworn depositions, and verified investigative outcomes, rather than reliance on headlines, viral edits, or inherited assumptions. It does not demand belief. It calls for careful analysis. Complex stories deserve more than surface-level conclusions. The historical record shows that Michael Jackson was investigated for years. He faced intense scrutiny from law enforcement and relentless examination by the press. In 2005, he stood trial in one of the most heavily covered celebrity court cases in modern history. After months of testimony and deliberation, a jury acquitted him on all 14 counts. That verdict remains part of the legal record. Decades later, his name appears in documents tied to a broader scandal, accompanied by deposition statements in which a witness denied any sexual contact or inappropriate interaction. Those, too, are facts that exist within the public record. The question, then, is not whether controversy surrounds his name. It undeniably does. The question is whether public attention has been directed evenly and proportionately. When a single figure becomes permanently associated with scandal, the intensity of that focus can overshadow other individuals and other avenues of inquiry that may warrant equal, if not greater, scrutiny. Public narratives have a gravitational pull. They center around recognizable symbols. And once that center is established, it can be difficult to shift. The final thought is simple, though not easy. Look at evidence, not just headlines. Examine context, not just trending reactions. Consider who benefits when attention narrows onto one figure and who remains unexamined when the spotlight refuses to move. In stories involving power, reputation, and allegations of abuse, the loudest narrative is not always the most complete one. See you next time.